The environmental management system standard, which is ISO 14001, I believe is even more important right now because it can be used by organizations to address all the environmental problems that we are facing around the world. I come from the developing country, from Malaysia. We are facing, of course, a lot of issues, environmental issues, but at the same time, businesses are also facing a lot of expectations from stakeholders, especially if we speak about the corporate sector, the business sector, investors and lenders. They're expecting companies to improve environmental performance, and the standard definitely helps organizations address the environmental performance by mitigating environmental impacts. This edition obviously is going to be an enhancement to the previous edition. What I like about this edition is the fact that it's going to provide more clarity to the requirements as well as the guidance provided in the annex. It aims to align better with the high-level structure so that organizations that wish to integrate their management systems will find it a much easier task. They will find that there is language in there that would help them to align the current needs in the context of sustainability, especially things like natural capital in there, which are more relevant terms these days. I believe it will help companies that are already using these standards to perhaps update their management systems to meet current enhanced requirements around the world. Because we have provided more clarity to the requirements and improved and added more useful information in the annex, which would help with avoiding misinterpretation, I believe SMEs would find it perhaps more user-friendly. I mean, it has always been user-friendly, but perhaps it will help them get a better grasp of the requirements. Read the standard. Please read the standard from page 1 right up till the end. Understand if there have been any updates, especially as we have added in requirements reflecting the high-level structure. So there could be a couple of clauses that were not there, and prepare yourselves to meet those requirements. The new version, basically, it would help companies address the most recent environmental issues, especially things like climate change. And I think it will help them prepare themselves better to face the needs and expectations of stakeholders, which are growing by the day based on environmental issues that are occurring around the world.
Ready? Unmute? Okay, go.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam Malaysia Madani. Yang berusaha Encik Ahmad Razif Abdul Rahim, Ketua Penolong Pengarah Kanan Bahagian Sterilisasi Jabatan Standard Malaysia. Yang berusaha Puan Amajid Kaur, Pengerusi Jabatan Kuasa Teknikal Environmental Management System, Environmental Auditing and Related Environmental Investigation, NSC 26. NSC 26 TC1 dan para hadirin yang dihormati sekalian. Saya Nurul Nadira Sabri selaku pengacara majlis pada hari ini mewakili pihak penganjur Jabatan Standard Malaysia ingin mengucapkan selamat datang ke webinar ISO 14001-2026 Environmental Management Systems Requirements with Guidance for Use. Baiklah, seterusnya. Hadirin sekalian diminta untuk berdiri bagi menyanyikan lagu negaraku. Hadirin dipersilakan duduk. Para hadirin yang dihormati sekalian, untuk makluman, sesi webinar ini dianjurkan bertujuan untuk memberikan pendedahan awal kepada umum berkenaan standard antarabangsa yang baru diterbitkan oleh ISO, iaitu ISO 14001, 2026 Environmental Management Systems Requirements with Guidance for Use. Sesi ini juga bertujuan untuk membantu memahami keperluan terkini serta perubahan signifikan dalam sistem pengurusan alam sekitar bagi memastikan amalan terbaik dapat diimplementasikan secara berkesan. Melalui sesi ini juga diharapkan tuan-puan akan mendapat penjelasan daripada pakar yang terlibat secara langsung di peringkat ISO berhubung dengan standard ISO 14001-2026 yang telah diterbitkan. Selain itu, memandangkan sesi ini disiarkan secara langsung, pihak kami ingin menjemput tuan-puan untuk klik pada butang subscribe saluran YouTube kami, iaitu saluran YouTube rasmi Jabatan Standard Malaysia bagi mengikuti video-video yang disediakan dari semasa ke semasa. Sokongan tuan-puan dalam menyokong saluran YouTube kami amatlah kami hargai. Baiklah, seterusnya, sesi ini diteruskan lagi dengan menjemput Yang Berusaha Encik Ahmad Razif Abdul Rahim, Ketua Penolong Pengarah Kanan Bahagian Sanisasi Jabatan Standard Malaysia untuk memberikan kata alu-aluan. Dengan segala hormatnya, silakan.
Terima kasih Cik Nadira. Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, salam Malaysia Madani. Yang Berusaha Puan Ahmad Majid, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. Terlebih dahulu Jabatan Standard Malaysia mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kehadiran tuan-puan dalam webinar pada kali ini. Sedikit mengenai Jabatan Standard Malaysia. Jabatan Standard Malaysia adalah di bawah Kementerian Pelaburan, Perdagangan dan Industri (MIPI) dan mempunyai dua fungsi utama, membangun dan mempromosikan standard yang telah dibangunkan seperti yang kita ada pada hari ini, dan juga mengakredit organisasi Badan Pematuhan Penilaian. Untuk makluman tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, sebagai badan standard kebangsaan, Jabatan Standard Malaysia telah membangunkan hampir 5,000 Malaysian Standard dalam pelbagai bidang, dan juga kita juga menyelaras penyertaan pakar-pakar Malaysia dalam aktiviti standardisasi di peringkat antarabangsa, termasuk dalam organisasi seperti ISO, IEC dan juga SMIC. Sebelum kita dengar daripada Puan Ahmad Majid, izinkan saya berkongsi sedikit latar belakang mengenai ISO 14001, 2026. Standard ini telah memasuki edisi keempat pada 2026 dan melalui edisi tahun 1996, 2004 dan juga 2015. Standard ini di bawah ISO TC 207 SC1 Environmental Management System dengan British Standards Institution BSI, iaitu sama taraf dengan Jabatan Standard Malaysia sebagai sekretariat, di mana Miss Andrea Biaru daripada sebagai Committee Manager dan juga Mr. Martin Baxter sebagai Chairperson. ISO TC 2007 SC1 telah menubuhkan working group yang dinamakan Working Group 15, Amendment ISO 14001 yang bertanggungjawab dalam projek pembangunan ISO 40001 yang mana pada mulanya sebagai projek pindaan Amendment 2 kepada versi 2015. Walau bagaimanapun, pihak ISO telah memutuskan untuk menerbitnya sebagai versi disatukan Consolidated Version yang secara teknikalnya menjadikan edisi keempat. Walaupun agak teknikal, nanti saya rasa Puan Amajid boleh share lah dia punya detail. Okay. Seterusnya untuk maklumat tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, Working Group 15 telah mengadakan sebanyak 12 sesi mesyuarat bagi memastikan kelancaran edisi 2026. Dan penceramah kita pada pagi ini, Puan Amajid telah terlibat secara aktif. Saya rasa Puan Amajid hadir semua sesi mesyuarat lah. So Puan Amajid adalah the right person lah untuk sama-sama kita berkongsi mengenai ISO 40001 versi 2026. Akhir pada saya, ada banyak soalan mengenai transition period ni. Daripada kawan-kawan di bahagian akreditasi telah maklumkan setakat ini tiada maklumat awal lah mengenai transition period ni. Jadi Jabatan Senior akan memaklumkanlah tuan-puan daripada masa ke semasa mengenai penguatkuasaan standard ni. Okey, untuk itu sekian ucapan haluan saya. Saya ucapkan terima kasih. Saya serahkan semula kepada Cik Nadia.
Baiklah, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Yang Berusaha Encik Ahmad Razif Abdul Rahim di atas kata-kata aluan sebentar tadi. Hadirin sekalian, bagi meneruskan program ini, sesi akan diteruskan lagi dengan overview of ISO 14001-2026 Environmental Management System, Requirements with Guidance for Use yang akan disampaikan oleh Yang Berusaha Puan Amajid Kaur yang merupakan pengerusi bagi Jawatan Kuasa Teknikal Environmental Management System, Environmental Auditing and Related Environmental Regulations 26 DC1. Untuk makluman para hadirin, Yang Berusaha Puan Amajid Kaur merupakan graduan sarjana pengurusan alam sekitar dari Universiti Putra Malaysia dan pemegang diploma lepasan ijazah dalam toksikologi alam sekitar dari University of Ulster, United Kingdom. Beliau mempunyai pengalaman lebih 25 tahun di dalam bidang alam sekitar yang berperanan sebagai perunding, jurulatih berdaftar, auditor, fasilitator dan pakar mewakili Malaysia secara aktif di dalam jawatan kuasa di peringkat antarabangsa iaitu ISO TC 207 SC1 WG15. Semasa sesi ini, tuan-puan boleh mengajukan soalan pada ruangan live chat dan soalan akan dijawab oleh Yang Berusaha Puan Amajid Kaur semasa sesi soal jawab sebentar lagi. Dengan segala hormatnya, majlis mempersilakan Yang Berusaha Puan Amajid Kaur bagi mengendali sesi ini.
Okey, terima kasih Nurul dan Cik Razif. Selamat pagi kepada semua para hadirin hari ini ya. Sesi saya akan laksanakan dalam bahasa Inggeris dan campur-campur sikit dengan bahasa Malaysia kerana kebetulan standard adalah dalam bahasa Inggeris ya. Dan saya tidak sempat nak terjemahkan maklumat yang ada dalam standard. So I hope you will allow me to continue in English, but I will make sure that I speak slow and so that everybody can follow my explanation. As mentioned earlier, if you would like to ask questions, you can add your questions into the chat box. I have also been informed that there may be a bit of a lag, so please be patient if there is some kind of a lag. Now, a bit of history for this webinar. Actually, when the FDs was out for ballot last year and we were having our TC meeting, I did request that we have this session when the standard is actually published.
And thankfully, Razif, due to his strong background in communications, he understood how important it is to communicate what is in the new standard, especially what are the changes. Since I have been involved in the development, not only of the 2026 edition, but also the 2015 edition, very closely involved. And, the resource person is here in Malaysia. I did share that, it is useful that we run this session. And I must admit that before this session, I have been checking out YouTube and LinkedIn and all the other social medias to find out what is being presented about the 2026 edition. And I found that some of the presentations by various organizations, be it trainers, consultants, certification bodies, and I'm not talking about Malaysia alone, but even international ones, the explanation sometimes goes a little bit exaggerated, yeah, where there are no new requirements. It is seem to be said that there are new requirements. Yeah, so this is the very reason why I felt this session was important, so that the Malaysian stakeholders that are users of the standard can get a little bit more clarity on especially what has changed since the 2015 version. So like I said, since I was involved in the development, and I do have insights even into the background of the changes, I felt it's very important that I share what I know about the standard with everyone. Now, I'm very happy to announce that we had about 1,300 something people register for this session. That's very positive. Out of which a very quick analysis showed that at least 80% or almost 90% of you come from industry. Industry meaning, you may come, you're a user of the standard, but you are from industry, manufacturing, services, and whatnot. And then the rest are others. Yeah, others could be people from certification bodies, even academia. I saw some, and then we also have consultant trainers. I'm very, very pleased that we have such a wide variety of participants today. To me, all of you are users. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're a consultant, trainer, or you're actually with an industry. The moment you pick up the standard and you start applying it within your own organization or for someone else, you are a user of the standard. The only difference is that, one is truly implementing the requirements in their own organization, while the others are probably guiding or carrying out third-party audits of those organizations. So again, very pleased with the number of registrants. I don't know whether all 1,300 are here, but there's always the 80-20 rule. So we shall live with it. So before I get on with my slides, I had also requested that Jabatan standard to ask you when you are registering to submit some questions. And again, I'm very pleased that there were a number of questions submitted. And I have gone through all the questions. I have categorized some of the questions because some of them are thematic. There are some questions are quite specific, but I will attempt to answer every single question that you had raised, including those that you are going to be putting up in the chat box as well. Some of them may be repeating, so please do listen. Yeah, I may have already answered your question. But just let me share with you, majority of the questions, which again I will address, there are a few themes. Of course, number one, the obvious one is what has changed? What has changed since the 2015 edition? And then some ask, so what are the implications on my organization, right? Are there big changes and small changes? So obviously, I'm going to go through the changes to address your question. Another category of questions came from, I think this one Razif mentioned about certification and transition, right? What's the transition period? He mentioned a little bit, and I will mention again at the end of the session. And then the date of release, the standard was released on April 15, 2026, all right? And then there were questions, interesting questions. Some people were asking about the relationship between ISO 14001:2026 and Malaysian regulations like the EQA, what's DOE's, maybe influence. I'll try and answer that as well. There were a number of questions on that. And there were also a number of questions on auditing the new edition, coming from certification auditors as well, what are the implications? And also some of you that have perhaps set for the lead auditor training course, previously, and then what's the implication on you? There were a lot of questions about that. And then there were also a number of questions about what's the relationship between ISO 14001:2026 and the ESG landscape currently, yeah? So how do these two connect? Somebody even asked about the relationship between this and sustainability disclosure requirements as well. So you can see that were a few chunks of question, and then there were some that were very unique and I would say quite technical about some of the specific clauses. And I will address those when I get to those clauses. Yeah. So I will attempt to answer all your questions as I go. And if you felt that I've not answered your question, you can always drop a chat, your question in the chat again. Okay, so that was a bit of an intro. Now let me share my slides with you. Right. So Nurul explained earlier on about my academic background. I didn't even think about my academic background. I've left academia so long. But this is a little bit of my current position. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professional, an environmental auditor and EMS auditor. I'm also a GRI certified sustainability professional. But I am here today playing my role as the chair of Technical Committee 1 of the NSC 26, which was formed to deal with standards related to environmental management and auditing standards. And like what Encik Razif said, I'm also part of the working group that worked on amending 14,001. All right, so like any slide presentation, obviously I have a content. I want to just explain a little bit of about my slides. You will notice that I have put a statement there about copyright. I will not be showing you the standard, yeah, because the standard obviously has got copyright requirements. So I'm not allowed to show the standards. In fact, when I talk about the clauses, I'm not going to be showing you the exact clause as well. I will make reference and, talk about the clauses. Because like I said, yeah, it's all subject to copyright. You have to purchase the standard and then read it. So I'll do a bit of an introduction, because I also found some questions from participants who want to know, who are perhaps new, yeah? I mean, maybe a lot of you have been using 14,001, but from the questions I can see there are some who are perhaps new to 14,001. So they've asked questions about, what is 14,001 about? Is it applicable to my organization? I'm an SME. Somebody even asked, should I impose this on my contractor? Somebody asked, how is it suitable for this nature of business and all that? So I'll do a bit of introduction. And then I'll go into the changes introduced, and then I'll talk about the practical next steps. So what do you need to do, right? Then we will come back to the Q&A. But like I said, yeah, I will address your questions that have already been submitted as I go on. All right, so let's talk about, I'm going to get to the standard, but I'm going to talk about why this standard is important. I'm going to put the standard into context, and we all know context is king. Now, I'm not sure whether all of you have seen this graphic or illustration, but I have to start with this, yeah, because you have to take 14,001 in context. So the scientists at the Stockholm University, they have been telling us that the planet, the ecosystems, the ecological situation of the planet is at an equilibrium. Yeah, nature is perfect. It's always in an equilibrium. Maksudnya, it is very balanced. But they have identified there are 9 parameters that if go over the safe zone will affect the equilibrium of the planet. So these are things like biodiversity, obviously climate change, ozone, stratospheric emissions, land use, water, phosphate use, nitrate use. So they are telling us that these things, right, if they go over the safe zone, it will affect the equilibrium. And they are telling us since 2009 until very recently, there are 9, at least 7 have been crossed. And if you look at these, we talk about climate change, biosphere integrity, that's biodiversity, land use, there's water there. These are all environmental conditions. So what they are telling us is, look, the environmental conditions that we are experiencing now, some of them are in dire situation, yeah? So we have this in mind, and these are scientifically proven studies done already. So what is the implication when that happens? What does that do to, let's come back to Malaysia, right? Let's bring it down to Malaysia. Obviously, we are already witnessing the consequences of those boundaries being exceeded. You talk about biodiversity, we are losing biodiversity. We are having issues with water, of course, climate change and its impacts, flooding. There is droughts. There is pollution, right? Air pollution, water pollution, soil fertility. So you can see how that global context, yeah, how those 9 parameters and the implication of that to our own country itself. And then obviously people are now getting more attuned to these things, right? Your what we call your stakeholders, your interested parties, your consumers, your neighbors, your employees, yeah, people on the street, they are beginning to feel the effects of what is going on, and they are not keeping quiet, right? We can see more and more push from consumer groups, yeah, or even community groups asking for their rights to clean air, clean water, and whatnot. And then shareholders, right, and customers, on the other hand, they are also asking you to be a bit more profitable, keep your costs down, yeah. So you have all these background things going on. And then I have to share this with you. I guess some of you have already seen this. You can see that, the World Economic Forum, they talk about the risks to the economy. And again, yeah, there's always this top 10 risks. And you can see that, in the long term, you've got extreme weather events, biodiversity, critical change to earth systems, natural resource shortages, pollution. At least half of them are related to the environment. So what the economists are telling us is that the economies of the countries are going to be affected by, consequences or impacts on the environment. So, take this into context. And then, of course, society, like I said, institutions and governments, and, based on the push from the stakeholders, also have to react to this. So this is where we have the Sustainable Development Goal which are based on the precautionary principles, right? Precautionary principle means, you know, you gotta make sure that before you do anything, you understand what are the risks and you take actions to mitigate. And then of course, we've got our regulations. All these regulations, local and even international ones, are there to respond to these changes, yeah, these global changes that are happening. So there's some expectation there. And then of course, we also have the need for communicating. So there is pressure on organizations to communicate. What are you doing about all of this? Do you understand what is going on? Do you understand your role in this? You know, and how are you performing in the areas that you should be focusing on? So you have all these reporting requirements, you know, ISSB, GRI, and all of that. And then of course, some of you already subscribe to some other ISO standards as well. So as an entity, as an organization, it doesn't matter whether you're an industry, you're a hotel, you're a university. As an organization, right? If you are operating in this landscape, you are expected to respond in some manner. So what do you do? Yeah, how do you go about you know, dealing with these issues? Because there is someone out there, or even within your organization, that is asking for answers. So this is where ISO 14001 comes in. Now, coincidentally, this year is ISO 14001's 30th birthday. It's 30 years old. It's probably older than some of the participants here. I know it's probably older with some people in this room. It was first published in the year 1996, yeah, in September. So it came about as a tool, yeah, as something that entities, organizations can use to deal with all those things that I spoke about earlier. So ISO 14001, basically, it is a standard that is providing an environmental management system. What it does, yeah, again, this is generally speaking for those of you who are not familiar with 14001 EMS, it provides you a framework that helps you to be able to protect the environment. Yeah, so it lets you to protect the environment and respond to those changing environmental conditions, and allows you to be in balance with socio-economic needs as well. And it specifies requirements. It has requirements in the standard that will allow you to achieve whatever outcomes you want to achieve for your environmental management system. So you imagine, you know, those lorries and the trailer, lorry dengan trailer kat belakang tu, it is a vehicle. I can put anything at the back on the trailer. I can set my direction anywhere. Okay, I want to go to Johor today. I want to go to Malacca, you know. So this vehicle, right, the EMS will help you go to wherever you want to go to, your intended outcomes, where you want to go to. Now, there are a lot of information here, and I must tell you that I think, majority of what I have here comes from the standard. Yeah, so again, do read the standard. So it allows you to give you a systematic approach to help you to learn, or not learn, to put in place mechanisms to protect the environment by preventing, mitigating adverse environmental. It is very much based on the oh my God, what's that you call it? You know, preventive, precautionary principle, sorry. Helps you to mitigate your adverse effects, meet your compliance obligations. Most importantly, it helps you to enhance your environmental performance. And also, by doing all of this, it will ultimately help you to achieve, you know, cost saving, improve your reputation, strengthen your position in society, helps you to earn that social license to exist, yeah. And obviously, it also allows you, remember earlier on I mentioned about all these disclosure requirements, it allows you to generate, come up with material information that is needed to disclose, yeah, or communicate with your stakeholders. So it allows the information to be generated in a reliable manner because it came from the implementation of an environmental management system. At the same time, it not only gets you to focus on what you are doing, it allows you, or it gets you to look at beyond your gates. Yeah, it gets you to look at your value chain, you know, out of your organization's boundary, to understand what's going on in your supply chain, all the way down to at the consumer stage, you know, understand your impacts and then address those impacts. So this standard, this is what it is there for. Yeah. So like I said, it can be applied by any organization, and it allows you to achieve your intended outcomes. Now, when you read the scope of the standard, it tells you that it talks about intended outcomes as a minimum, right? The intended outcomes that you should be trying to achieve, or you should be achieving, is number one, enhancing your environmental performance, meeting your compliance obligations, and then achieving your environmental objectives. You can have other intended outcomes for sure. You may want to use your EMS to demonstrate how you are supporting the sustainable development goals. Go ahead, yeah. But as a basic ones, these are the three basic ones. So at the end of the day, if your EMS is not able to get you to achieve these three intended outcomes, then you got to go back and look at, you know, how can we improve that. Now, how does this standard do that? It provides you a framework. It has requirements within this framework. And as all management system standards that ISO, or most ISO management system standards, are based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, right? PDCA. So the standard itself is framed in a way that you will carry out certain activities which are planning in nature, and then there are some things that you will be doing as in actions, and then there is a component of monitoring, and then of course improvement, and then there are some things that are there to support you. Now, interestingly, in the middle you have got leadership. Yeah, so there's a clause on leadership. It is in the middle. Why? Because the leadership clause is anchoring all the other clauses, and it specifically says that, you know, leadership has to be committed, has to be accountable for all these other things to be able to be carried out successfully. So all of this, obviously, you do this to achieve your intended outcome, yeah, by understanding your context as well. Now, how do you demonstrate? Yeah, so maybe you have stakeholders, you know, asking you, right, you told me that you have an EMS, and then you said that you have an EMS that meets ISO 14001. How do you demonstrate that, yes, my environmental management system conforms to ISO 14001? Because you can have an environmental management system that is not following ISO 14001. I know there are some industry associations that have their own EMS structures and frameworks as well. So you can demonstrate this either by making a self-declaration, you know, you declare that, yep, my EMS meets 14001, or you can get a second party, you know, you can get your client to come and look at your EMS to say that, yep, yours meets it, or you can get an NGO to come in and give you an attestation to say that your EMS conforms by 14001. Or, you know, you can get someone else to come and look at your self-declaration. And then, of course, you can seek certification or registration, you know, done by an external organization, an accredited certification, right? Which is what majority of the time people do. Now, what these are options, and you are free to choose whichever option. But then, of course, you need to understand why, you know, the needs of your interested parties or your stakeholders. You know, sometimes you, in order to provide more confidence, you go for certification, right? Or, you know, you may want to just do self-declaration. Actually, it is all up to you. There's no compulsion in this. So, who is the one who is writing these standards? So very obviously, it's an ISO standard. So ISO TC 207 SC1. 207 is the technical committee at ISO that looks at environmental management related standards. And there are several subcommittees, 1 all the way down to 7. So 1 is the one that is developing ISO 14001. But you can go to their website, and there's a lot of information on the website. I encourage you to go there. It's a new website. Now, ISO SC1 has published a whole range of standards, and then there are a whole range under development as well. But out of all the standards, there are only 2 that have got requirements, means they are certifiable. The rest are guidance, okay? So 14,001, 2 part 1, 2 part 2, these are interesting standards that came out because there was a request from users out there back in 2012 saying that, look, we need to understand how to apply EMS to a particular topic. So that's when SC1 started to produce 14,002, which are topical. That means so far they have published a general one, and they have published one on how to apply EMS to deal with water. And now they are working on how to apply EMS to deal with climate, and how to apply EMS to deal with resource and waste, you know. So specific topics, how do I use 14,001 for specific topics? But remember, these are guidance, they are not certifiable standards. And of course, there's 14,004, which is the general guidelines on implementation. And then there are many more, many more, yeah, monetary valuation, material flow cost, accounting, and all of that. But I suppose you're only familiar with 14,001. Now, I'm sorry about this. Something is wrong with my graphic here, but this is supposed to show the latest 14,001 2026 frequently asked questions document, yeah, FAQs. So there are questions and answers to the new edition. So go to this website and check out all the resources there. Okay. Time check. Oh, wow. Okay. So all management system standards produced by ISO, they go through an evolution, yeah. So every 5 years, you will go through a systematic review, meaning, you know, the member bodies will decide whether the standard needs to be revised or do we need to maintain it and all of that. So you can see this standard is an edition 4. So we had one in 96. We had one in 2004, then we had the 2015, and then we have this one, 2026. So when it came to a systematic review not long ago, the question was asked again, all right, do we want to revise the standard or do we want to amend the standard? Now you'll be wondering what is the meaning of revise or amend. Or the third option is maintain it lah, all right? Remember when the 2015 version came out, after 5 years, like 2020, we probably needed to go through a revision, but at that point, the decision was to maintain it now, right? So then the next question was revise or amend. Now, difference between revision or amendment, revision is, you know, you open up the standard comprehensively, you can make all kind of technical changes to it, you know, anybody can come in and say, oh, we want to change this, change that. So it's a total opening up of the standard and then revising. Amendment, on the other hand, is normally, there may be a revision, but it's very limited, very specific, very focused, without opening up the whole standard to inviting other technical changes, for example. So how was the decision made? Obviously, it had to go through the whole process, balloting and all that. But I just want to share with you some of the inputs into the decision making. SC1 obviously looked at the systematic review comments. There was a user survey done in 2021. So we looked at the results. There was a study done on EMS future challenges recommendations. And then the harmonized structure changes. Now the harmonized structure, which I will mention many times, harmonized structure, which is found in Annex SL. What had happened a few years ago, ISO had decided that all the management system standards shall be written in a prescribed format, yeah, same format, same number of clauses, you know, same terms and definitions, and you know, even the clauses are named same, but they can be customized based on the different disciplines. Disciplines meaning quality, environment, health and safety and all that. So obviously 14,001, 2015 was written based on the 2015, on the harmonized structure. But since then, even the harmonized structure had gone through some revisions. So the working group had to go through these changes and make sure that the next edition applies this. And then of course, the global context, you know, what's going on in the global environmental landscape. So these was the outputs of these 5 things was used to decide. So at the end of the day, the decision was made through balloting. Member bodies and all that came in and put in their views, and decided that no revision but amendment. So it's an amendment. It is not a revision. So it wasn't open up for changes, new requirements, and all that. And the scope of the amendment, so the working group was formed to work on the amendment, and then the scope was given very specifically. This was the mandate given to the working group. So number one was to incorporate the harmonized structure content, because the harmonized structure had changes. So every MSS must follow that, right? So number one was to make sure that whatever changes to the harmonized structure is incorporated into the next edition. And that meant there could be new requirements into 14,001 because maybe something changed in the harmonized structure. The second mandate was based on all the user surveys and the future challenges recommendations, looking at the global context. The second mandate was look at clarification of existing requirements in 2015 associated with key topics. Number one, to enhance the guidance in the Annex A, and where necessary, rephrase the current requirements, include notes or other methods if necessary to make the requirements clearer without adding any requirements or removing requirements. All right, so I want to make this very clear because people are asking, what are the new requirements? The new requirements are there as far as making sure that the harmonized structure content is incorporated. Other than that, no new requirements have been introduced and no requirements have been taken out. All right. So the focus was to clarify on the existing requirements actually. Now, I hope you will purchase and read the standard. Now, the clarification, just let me explain to you. The user survey in 2021 asked for clarification on certain concepts. So the users asked that there is clarification on life cycle perspective. Please clarify how life cycle perspective is applied. Please clarify how risks and opportunities relate to aspects and impacts. And then how, controls, how do you apply controls in the supply chain? And again, the life cycle perspective within the operational control requirements. All right, so this came out very clear requests from the users. They want clarification. And then other topics for clarification that were highlighted, from the other studies was making sure that there is a clarification on how the standard aligns with strategy, with other business processes, integrating it with other management systems, how we can use these for specific topics. So this is where 14,002 series comes in. What about how does this help with external reporting? Where does environmental responsibility? What about culture, employee engagement? So these were all requests for clarification. There were no requests for new requirements. There were no requests for, making technical changes, but everyone was seeking for clarification. So the output of that is 14,001 2026 edition 4. Now the standard was published on 15 April. So what that means is when the ISO standard was published in 15 in April, the 14,001 2015 is withdrawn, yeah? But because in Malaysia, we will adopt the standard as an MS. As you know, 14,001 has been adopted as an MS ISO. The process of coming up with an MS ISO 14,001 2026 has to undergo our own local processes. And that one would, I have been informed that, it will probably be published in the third quarter of this year. All right. So there will be an MS as well. So this is how the 2026 standard looks like. So for those of you who are new to 14,001, remember I said that you have clauses. So here you got 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. Now, those of you who have been using 2015, maybe if you don't have the 2026 version, you can open up the 2015 version and you can start comparing. Yeah, you will immediately see that nothing much has changed. except for maybe there is one new sub-clause here, there is a new clause here, and maybe there is a bit of a subdivision of here. Everything else, and then this one also maybe is missing one sub-clause. Yeah, so things have been moved around. But let me tell you, the biggest effort, yeah, was put into Annex A. Now, I want to explain to you the importance of Annex A. Now, clauses 4 until clauses 10 contain requirements. It's got all the shall statements, right? Shalls, you shall do this, you shall do that. But this standard, right, the requirements must be read together with the annex. The annex provides guidance on how to use this document, and it provides information to prevent misinterpretation. So you cannot ignore the annex. You cannot ignore the annex. Now, the next time you pick up the 14,001, you must make sure that you read the annex. In fact, I would advise you to read the annex first and then go to the requirements, because the annex explains to you the intent, how to use this standard, all right? So obviously, because there was a lot of requests to provide clarification. Now, you can only provide so much clarification in requirements. Because if you provide a lot of clarification in requirement, the requirements will keep expanding, and that's not useful. So in order to provide more clarification, a lot of effort was put into the annex. Yeah. So I cannot stop emphasizing, please make sure that you read the annex, and it is there to prevent misinterpretation. Even during audits, right? Yes, Annex A is informative. That means it doesn't have shall statements. I can't audit what is in Annex A. But the information in Annex A provides clarity to the requirements. So even when I'm auditing the standard, I will be referring to Annex A to make sure that the way I have interpreted the requirements is in line with the intent of that particular clause, which is expanded on in Annex A, all right? So very important, yeah, Annex A. And you may remember that in February 2024, all the management system standards underwent an amendment, yeah, that included the London Declaration, yeah, that came out from London, the ISO London Declaration, to make sure that in every management system standard, as part of context, organizations shall determine if climate change is an issue, if you remember. So in the same manner, the 14,001 2015 also underwent one amendment in 2024, but only for that. So this particular edition incorporates that, all right? So that means this is also withdrawn. Huh? So this is also withdrawn because the amendment has been incorporated into the 14,001 2026 edition, and I will show you where and how it has been incorporated. All right. So now I'm going to introduce some the changes to the standard. Of course, have you read 14,001 2026? If you have not, I would suggest that if you have the 2015 edition, maybe you can open up and then look at it, then you will understand, you know, when I am talking about or referring to the changes, you'll understand where the changes. Now, please, a little bit of a disclaimer from me. This is this overview is highlighting the key changes, and it's a high-level overview. It does not replace a full reading of the standard. You must still refer to the standard to make sure that you understand everything. And the changes that I'm going to touch on, again, they are the big changes, right? There could be one or two, you know, like an additional comma and all. I'm not going to go into that, yeah? I am going to go into the changes that are perhaps going to have the larger impact on those already implementing 14,001 2015. Okay, now I'm going to, you may be expecting me to show you like a table old and new. No, I'm not doing that. I am doing this based on the mandate that was given to the working group on what to do. So if you remember, the two things, number one was to make sure that all the new changes, all the content of the harmonized structure are included in 14,001/2026, all right? And the second thing was to provide clarification. So I'm going to be introducing the changes based on this, all right? So as far as the first expectation to incorporate the harmonized structure content, and remember I said these may have led to new requirements. So indeed, it did lead to new requirements. Now, before I get into this, if you remember, I mentioned even the 2015 edition was written in alignment with the harmonized structure. However, different disciplines were allowed to deviate on certain content because maybe it's not appropriate to that particular discipline. Again, I mentioned discipline like environment, quality, and all that. So some of these things that were already in the harmonized structure, in the 2015 version, they do not appear because at that time, subcommittee 1 felt it was not necessary to include, all right? But at this revision, or sorry, at this amendment, it became more important that the harmonized structure is fully respected, all right? So those things that were not there in the 2015 have been included now in this edition. However, having said that, there were still some minor things that were not included, no? What we call deviation, which were all, reported and, recorded as well. So the new requirements, there are 4 things. If you ask me, okay, what are the new requirements in 14,001/2026 compared to 14,001/2015? This is what they are. And I will go through these one by one. There's a new clause on change management, 6.3 wasn't there. There's an expanded requirement on externally provided products, documentation on audit program, and management review inputs. New requirements. Now, when I say new requirements, that means new clause, new shalls, yeah, and change in the requirement. So the new requirement number on planning of change, I mean, those of you who are familiar with 9001, you know it's always been there. Now, the reason why this wasn't there in the 2015 version is because when you read 14,001/2015, you will realize that change is included in various clauses already. Aspects in communication, auditing, operational control. The concept of change and managing change already inside there. But in order to now align with the harmonized structure, 6.3 planning of change has been introduced. So basically what it says is that, look, when there is a change, you shall make sure that it is carried out in a planned manner. And whatever the change is, you need to make sure that the intended outcomes of the EMS is met, all right? And the change can be those that affect or can affect the EMS, yeah? So there is an actual and potential. And there is a note in this requirement as well. The note says that change can come from inside the organization or outside the organization. And then there is another note that tells you to look at the annex, because the annex explains more about planning of change. It even gives you examples of what kind of changes, even things like war and protests and all of that is there as an example of a change. And it also explains, like I mentioned just now, that change is already addressed in other clauses in 14,001. So this is a new requirement now. So the implications of this, obviously, you should be able to demonstrate that you have made sure that if there has been any change, you have looked at your EMS to understand the implications on the EMS, and you have taken actions, right? Put in mechanisms to make sure that you are not deviating from the intended outcome of your EMS still. Now, the other thing I missed to mention is that, 14,001 provides you requirements on what you need to do, yeah, not how you need to do that. The how is still in your hands. Huh? to demonstrate it and to implement it. Now, the next new requirement is, if you remember, outsourced processes was in clause 8.1. It said something like the organization shall determine how to control or influence outsourced processes, full stop. It was like that. But now, again, this is in line with the harmonized structure. Outsourced processes has been removed from there and replaced with externally provided products, services, and processes. So now the clause 8.1 basically talks about you shall determine how to control, influence externally provided processes, products, or services that are relevant to the intended outcomes of the EMS. Yeah, you make sure that they are controlled or influenced. So number one, outsourced processes is replaced by externally provided products, services, and processes. And number two, there's a little bit of what do you call it, a definition of what this could be. These are those that are relevant to the intended outcomes of your EMS. If you remember before that, it just full stop. It didn't say relevant to the outcomes of the EMS. So this is a change, yeah, because an outsourced process, an externally provided process, I have another slide about this, but basically it is a service or a process or a product that an organization needs, but it is provided by an external organization, all right? So keep that in mind. An outsourced process is actually a subset of an externally provided process, product, and services. So this has actually expanded the scope. So this means anyone that is providing you a goods or a service or a process. Yeah. So last time it was quite limiting to outsourced processes. So you need to keep this in mind when you're looking at updating your management system. And even the definition of outsource has been removed in the annex as well. There was a whole explanation of what can be an outsourced process. Of course, that is gone as well. Now, interestingly, this actually comes from, if you look at the definition of audit, the definition of audit has changed slightly, but the change is quite consequential in my opinion. There, in the original definition of audit, it said something like an audit is a systemic process documented. It said documented there, but the word documented has been removed from the definition of audit. So of course, the implication is that, right, if that has been removed from the definition, you need to understand now what do I need to actually document about the audit process. So consequently, in the requirement itself, the high harmonized structure has included certain areas where you need to document certain things. Yeah. So again, you can pick up your 2015 version and then look at this. Previously, it said that you shall define audit criteria and scope for each audit. Now you shall define audit objective as well, yeah, in addition to audit criteria and scope. And you need documented information. Previously, it was documented information on your audit program implementation, evidence, and audit results. But now you also are required to document your audit program itself, yeah. Obviously, if you go to the annex, there's a little bit more explanation, and then the annex will tell you, you want to know more about this, look at ISO 19011. Now, the other new requirement is in the clause of management review. Now, management review used to be clause 9.3, but again, to be in line with the harmonized structure, it has been broken into 3. Nothing much has changed, it's just been changed, broken into 3 to, what do you call that, general, management review inputs and management review results. The change here is previously the standard said that, you know, when you carry out your the management review shall consider the following inputs. And you remember there's a whole shopping list of inputs that you can consider, A to G, you know, changes, new aspects and all of that. Now the word considered is gone. It says that you shall, yeah. So your management review shall include this A until G. So your management review agenda shall reflect A until G. Yeah? So that's not a, so this is a change from consider, it has become shall. So the rest of the clause is not changed, it's just being broken up. All right. So now those are the new requirements. Huh? Okay. I'll give you a second to digest that. So if you say new requirements, those are the new requirements. And then certain things had to be changed, which are not new requirements, to align with harmonized structure. So what are the changes? For example, harmonized structure, there is a definition of policy. 2015 edition, no definition on policy, only definition on environmental policy. So now in order to align with harmonized structure, insertion of definition of policy. So there's a definition of policy. The definition of environmental policy has been slightly changed because now there's a definition of policy. There's always been a definition of interested parties, but in harmonized structure, there was an admitted term. Admitted term means, you know, you can also use this term to mean the same thing. So harmonized structure had stakeholder as an admitted term for interested party. So now 14,001 has as well. And there's an additional note added to the definition of organization. Again, to align with harmonized structure. There is a note to the definition of environmental management system. There is a note added to the definition of objective. And I mentioned about the definition of audit has been changed. Now the change is because to align with the harmonized structure definition. Now, interestingly, the definition of risk has been removed from 14,001 because even in the harmonized structure, it's not there. And because the term risk is not used in 14,001 on its own, it is not necessary to define it anyway. So definition of risk has been removed. Definition of outsource has been removed for the reason I explained earlier on. There are new phrases for documented information. I will come to it. Now, if you remember in the 2015 version, we used to say thou, not thou, sorry, the organization, you know, one of the intended outcome is to fulfill compliance obligations. Now, in the harmonized structure, fulfill is not used, meet is used. All right. So instead of fulfill compliance obligations, now it says meet compliance obligations. Does this actually change the requirement? And obviously it doesn't. Yeah. So it is just to align the words and terms with the harmonized structure without introducing new requirements. If you go to clause 4.2, you will see that in bullet C, it says that, you know, you shall determine your compliance obligations. And then there's a little bit more added to the end of it. It says, determine how you address these through the environmental management system. It wasn't there in the 2015 version because it's quite self-explanatory. When you determine your compliance obligation and you want to address them, obviously, you address them through your EMS, right? But now these words are added again in order to align with the harmonized structure without changing the actual requirement. In clause 5.1 on leadership, if you go to bullet I, it used to say other relevant management rules. Now harmonized structure has changed that to other relevant rules. So therefore 14,001 aligns with harmonized structure. Now it says other relevant rules. You know, remember leadership, top management shall support other relevant rules. And the note that used to be under bullet I, it's now moved up to bullet C. So some of the changes to align with harmonized structure, which are not introducing new requirements, all right? Summary on the terms and phrases. Again, these are to align with the harmonized structure. In fact, previously, when you read the standard, it used to say this international standard. Now, the standard doesn't say this international standard, it says this document. Now, outcome versus results. Harmonized structure talks about results, intended results, but 14,001 still uses outcome in certain requirements and results in certain requirements because they mean different things. So if you look at clause context, it talks about, look at your issues which can affect your intended outcomes. It still says outcomes. It doesn't say result because outcome is larger than results, right? It is very strategic. And results could be something that is in the past, and results also could be something that you are going to be quantifying. Anyway, these terms and their explanation are in Annex, yeah, in Annex A3, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm taking all this from the Annex, which is why I want to repeat. Annex is very important. Shall be available as documented information replaces maintain documented information. If you remember, some of the clauses requires you to maintain documented information or retain documented information. So the harmonized structure now doesn't say that. Harmonized structure says instead of maintain documented information, it says shall be available as documented information. Retain documented information, it now says documented information shall be available as evidence. So obviously these are records, and the other one are everything else besides records. All right. So you will see the change in this language. Now this term available, what does available mean? Yeah. Again, explained in the annex. Available, you will look at the standard and you will say certain places it says documented information shall be available, and there are two clauses, yeah, specifically the EMS scope and policy, where it says that the scope shall be available to interested parties. Now they do mean different things. The first, available, obviously means that it is retrievable. I want to use it, it is there, it is kept up to date, it is controlled, and all of that. Nothing has changed. When it says be available to interested parties, it means that, should an interested party request for it, ask for it, you shall make sure that it is available to them. All right. So a slight a bit of nuance there, yeah, difference in the use of the terms. But there are only two clauses where it says something is available to interested parties. Outsource is deleted. Now, externally provided process products or services, I already explained. Yeah, it is something that is used by the organization but is supplied by somebody from outside the organization. And this external provider could be contractors, yeah, that is providing you products or even a service, and risk is deleted. So again, these are terms, phrases changed to meet the expectation of the harmonized structure. So that was to ensure that the amendment is aligned with the harmonized structure. Then remember, the other mandate to the working group was to answer all the expectations from the users through the user survey and all the other studies done. Mainly was to clarify the requirements, yeah? Not about revision, but to clarify requirements, because people have been using the 2015 version for some time already. So from using it, there was feedback about the 2015 version. So remember, it was the first request was, how do you clarify this, enhance the guidance in Annex A? How do you clarify it? You want to rephrase the current requirements. The clarification is perhaps rephrase the current requirements, but remember, without adding new requirements and excluding existing requirements. To clarify by including notes or other methods if necessary. All right. So mainly about clarification. Yeah. No new requirements, no removal of requirements. So what that meant was the holistic focus on the environment has to be maintained, meaning 14,001 is about the environment, yeah, environmental impacts, environmental aspects. Clarify risks and opportunities. In order to clarify that, there was a reordering of the clauses, but the understanding of risks and opportunities, and there was no additions to that, because you know you have to make sure that the delicate balance and consensus between layman's understanding of risks and opportunities and technical and all of that is maintained. Clarified life cycle perspective using a note and all of that. And then you will see certain clauses where sentences have been moved just to give clarity of reading the requirement. And the clauses on in clause 10, improvement and continual improvement has been merged with corrective actions. Again, clarity. Yeah. In addition to that, other things have been clarified in the annex. And you will notice also when you read the new standard, there's a lot of cross-referencing among clauses. So there will be a lot of times where the requirements will say CA.1, C6.1, you know, so there's a lot of cross-referencing and additional notes have been added to provide the clarity. So how to maintain the holistic focus on the environment? In clause 4.1, when you talk about context, I want to emphasize this, yeah, because this is where I noticed some of the videos that I've been watching, some of the speakers have been introducing this as new requirements. The 2026 edition talks about when you are determining your issues, yeah, you need to include also environmental conditions. This is not new. Environmental conditions have always been there in clause 4.1. And then in the annex of the 2015 version, you will see environmental conditions. There are examples to environmental conditions. It already said climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem, and all of that. It has always been there in the standard. What has changed is those examples have been brought into the requirement. So now where it says environmental conditions, you know, when you are determining your issues, these issues shall include environmental conditions. The addition now is there are examples given, such as pollution level, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity or ecosystem health. This is not a change. This is not a new requirement. It is a change, but the change is as far as bringing those examples from the annex and put into the requirements. Okay, it had always been there. It has always been there. The intent has always been there. It has always been in the annex. Now, this is where it incorporates the amendment, the 2024 amendment. If you remember, the 2024 amendment at the end of clause 4 said that you must another sentence was added which said the organization shall determine whether climate change is a relevant issue. Now in this addition, the sentence has been changed and climate change has been incorporated. That means the amendment has been incorporated. Now this is an environmental management system standard. It is about the environment. So if we want to talk about environmental conditions, it should not be limited to climate change. So that is why the examples have to be expanded to other environmental conditions: pollution, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem health. All right. So the focus is not on climate change. This is not another climate change standard. Okay. And in similar manner, in clause 4.2 as well, a note was added in 2024, but the note only confined to climate change. But now, again, because environmental conditions is included in the standard, what it says now is that the interested parties' needs and expectations can be related to environmental conditions such as pollution, availability. All right. So what these two clauses are saying, obviously, is that when you are thinking about your context, you need to make sure that you consider these things. Have you considered these things? There are more examples. If you look in the annex, there are more examples of environmental conditions. And just like your issues, right, your other issues, did you make sure once you understand this, obviously your EMS must reflect this understanding. meaning when you're looking at how to set up your EMS, when you're thinking about your scope, when you're thinking about your aspects, impacts, your compliance obligations, your risk opportunities, they must reflect that you have considered these environmental conditions. Okay, I know I'm running behind time, but I'm trying to answer the questions as well. Yeah. So life cycle perspective, one of the requests was that, how do we deal with life cycle perspective? So this has been re-emphasized in the standard. Now, why life cycle perspective is important in 14,001? Obviously, it is to make sure that you are not preventing or you're preventing shifting impacts across your value chain. All right. It doesn't mean that, somebody else is carrying out that activity that is creating all the heavy metal pollution, but it is somebody else. It is in your value chain. The life cycle perspective will not allow you to ignore that fact. All right. You need to consider that something is happening in your supply chain. So that's where the life cycle perspective comes in. Again, it has always been there, but it is re-emphasized and it is clarified. How is it clarified? Without being a new requirement, yeah? Clarified without being a new requirement. If you look at scope, in bullet E, it used to say when you want to determine your scope, you shall consider A, B, C, D, and then E talks about your authority and ability to exercise control and influence. Now, the extra words have been added over the life cycle of your activities, products, and services. Now, why am I saying this is not new? Because the life cycle perspective, when determining your scope, was already explained in the annex itself. Again, is being brought into the requirement to re-emphasize that this is about life cycle perspective. And in clause 6.2, under environmental aspect, a new note has been included. The note, again, was an explanation that's set in the annex, but is being brought in as a note. Now, a note in the clauses itself means that it is providing clarification. It helps you, guides you to understand. So now it explains, when you think about the life cycle perspective, this means at each life cycle stage, yeah, acquisition, raw materials, design, production, transport, all the way down to final disposal. Of course, this is depending on the applicability to the nature of your business. So if you don't do design, no, doesn't mean you don't have to think about life cycle perspective. There must be some planning that you are doing in your activities itself. Now, in the annex, life cycle perspective is re-emphasized in the annex again. It explains further, right, that look, your aspects can happen outside of the organization. Your aspects can happen when you are buying things from a particular contractor or a service provider. Your aspects can happen when somebody is using your product, but you are not able to control that. But then you may be able to influence some of those, yeah? So there's further explanation on this. And more importantly, in the annex, it says, in order to take a life cycle perspective, you don't need to do a detailed life cycle assessment. I need to emphasize this. You don't need to do a detailed life cycle assessment in order for you to take a life cycle perspective. Somebody in a previous webinar asked me, how then do I take a life cycle perspective if I don't do a life cycle assessment? My answer to that is a life cycle perspective means you sit down, you understand what's going on within your boundaries, outside of your organization. Remember, these are all things related to the intended outcome of your EMS. Have knowledge about what's happening in different life cycle stages. And you can map it out, you can, talk about it, you can discuss it, to show that you have this understanding. You don't have to do a detailed life cycle assessment. It doesn't stop you from doing it, but it is not a requirement that you do a life cycle assessment. And when I say a life cycle assessment, it's almost per ISO 14040 series, yeah, where you do a proper, even quantitative assessment and all of that. So you don't have to do that. And life cycle perspective, again, re-emphasized in clause 8.1. Remember, I mentioned that it is now externally provided processes. And again, in 8.1, it says that, how do you take life cycle perspective? Understanding that, product services that come from other organizations, there could be significant impacts there. So you need to exert some kind of control or influence, right? And again, your effort in influencing very much depends on what you do, your size, your understanding of those significant impacts, and also by the other parties as well. So I've drawn a very easy, diagram, life cycle perspective. Now, when the standard says you influence, it doesn't mean you go into the organization and tell them what to do, because it's a separate entity. The way you influence is using your own internal processes, right? Either through your procurement processes, your selection, your evaluation processes. That's how you try to control and influence those aspects that are happening outside of your organization. Sometimes it is enough to just provide information because you have no control over how I use the handphone that you're making, but you give me information. When you want to dispose this, make sure you dispose it as an electronic waste. Yeah, so it may be that enough to do that in order to exert influence, right? So all of this is explained in there. Okay, now the other area that was requested for clarity was the clause on risks and opportunities. So basically the users said that they could not understand the linkage between aspects, compliance obligations, and then risks and opportunities. Because at the end of the day, ISO 14001, at the core of the management system is your ability to identify, determine, manage your significant environmental aspects, your significant environmental impacts. Yeah, so that's the core of it. And then in 2015, risks and opportunities was introduced. So in order to address those concerns, there was a reordering of the clauses compared to the 2015 version. But the requirements are the same. Nothing has changed. There is no new requirement. Nothing has been removed. All that has been done is that there's been a reordering and a new subclause has been added for clarity. So before it looked like this, now it looks like this, right? There is a new subclause called risks and opportunities. When I say reordering, what I mean by that is previously 611 general started off saying that, within the scope of your EMS, you shall address risks and opportunities, look at your scope, 4142, determine which ones you want to address, and these are related to aspects of that. So that was here, 611. All that has been done is that has been extracted out and put under this new subclause called risks and opportunities. Nothing else has been changed. So it is giving emphasis on environmental aspects, your compliance obligations, risks and opportunities. So it now just reads like that. I want to emphasize no new requirements and no requirements have been taken out. Now there is an explanation for this in the annex. It talks about, now clause 611 general, all it says is that you shall establish processes in order to undergo 612, 613, 614 and all of that. So there's just almost a two-liner there, okay? And then it explains in the annex that, this entire clause, you view it from a risk-based approach. Now, how you go about this, again, the annex says it is up to you. What kind of processes you want to use, it is up to you. You want to use one process to look at your aspects, risks and opportunities, it is up to you. You want to do this separately, it is up to you as well. So in the annex of the clause 614, it explains, there's a new annex on 614. What it says is that, remember, you've looked at your aspects, you've looked at your compliance obligations, and you know that your aspects and your compliance obligations can also result in risks and opportunities. And then, but don't forget that when you are looking at your EMS, there could be risks and opportunities coming from those external issues, internal issues, Remember those environmental conditions. And then it says that some of these you may want to address. But again, how you want to address depends on you, your ability, your capability. What process you want to use to address or determine this, again, it is up to you as well. And in the clause 614, there is a whole list of examples of risks and opportunities with beneficial and adverse effects. So please do read this. Now, coming back to clause 612, remember I said no new requirements, some reshuffling has been done. Determining potential emergency situation used to be in 611, now it is in 612. Same requirement, you shall determine potential emergency situations. If you look at aspects, you will notice that, it used to say, when you determine your aspects, take into account changes, abnormal conditions, and reasonably foreseeable emergency situations. Now it has been clarified. It now says that when you want to identify your aspects, take into account normal. It was understood, that you need to take into account normal. And it was also mentioned in the annex before. It's just being clarified. Look at normal, look at abnormal conditions, look at change, and then look at potential emergency situations. So it doesn't say reasonably foreseeable emergency situations. It now says potential emergency. But in the annex, it still talks about reasonably foreseeable emergency. It hasn't changed, So please don't think that potential emergency situation may mean something else, all right? That hasn't changed. And in planning action 615, the sentence has been clarified. Now it says, how do you implement the actions into the EMS processes or integrate actions into business? Last time it used to say implement or integrate. So it's just been broken for clarity sake as well. I'm almost at the end. Now, there are other additions to the annex which I want to draw your attention to. So, for example, under context, there is reference to all these other ISO standards. These are specific standards talking about biodiversity, talking about climate adaptation mitigation, talking about natural capital accounting. So there's specific references on this as well. And then you will notice in the bibliography as well, those standards like 31,000 has been removed. So these have changed as well. So you can see there is a bit more focus on making sure that, when we are dealing with our environmental management system, we are looking at those, the scope of an environment more critically. In the annex as well, there's explanation on how do you incorporate actions into the EMS, integrating it. Under objectives, it clarifies, in the requirement, if you remember for objective, it says that, objectives shall be measurable if practical. But in the annex, it says that, yes, if practicable, but this should be treated as an exception, all right? So you cannot always say that it's not practical for me to measure this objective. The annex says that you shall not make this the norm. It is treated as an exception. External communication has been expanded in the annex. It talks about when you're dealing with external communication, how it links to your disclosure requirements. Compliance evaluation of compliance in the annex, it says that when you're doing your compliance evaluation, you can look at evaluations done by external parties as well and use that as part of your compliance evaluation. And management review, it emphasizes that top management is accountable, and it also gives a bit more clarity on the periodicity, the intervals on when to do your management review. It says that when you want to do your management review, the intervals must be appropriate, adequate, so that you can make decision, effectively and timely. So it's not like 2 years once and all of that. So there are all these clarifications that have been added in the annex, which is why I said it's very critical that you read the annex to get a better understanding of the requirements. So one of the key takeaways at the end of the day, this is better to align with the harmonized structure, provide more clarity, broader thinking. It's not about doing more, but it's to apply the standard more effectively. Right, now next steps. What do you need to do? Obviously, get the standard, understand the changes, compare your current EMS and your practices against the new requirements and the clarification. So you have new requirements and then you have certain things that have been clarified. So you need to make sure that what you've been implementing, is it aligned with what has been clarified? Obviously, update your EMS, training awareness, and of course, conduct your internal audit to verify conformity to the new edition. And then talk to your certification body, yeah, for transition matters, if applicable. Now, the transition, actually, when the new edition came out, the 3-year transition period should already kick in, yeah. But again, because in Malaysia, we've got the MS, and I already mentioned the MS is probably going to be published in the 3rd quarter. So Department of Standard, through the accreditation body, will have to make the announcement, yeah, about the transition. And obviously, this will be communicated to all the certification bodies that have been accredited by DSM. And then obviously you can get information from your certification body. Now, ISO is also working on smartification of their standards. What that means is that they're trying to make their standards more AI ready. Yeah? So 14,001 is one of the standards that have been identified to be smartified. So this may be coming up. So it will be AI ready as well. But that is ISO to sort out. All right. One thing before I get to the Q&A, normally there is a process of interpretation, yeah, queries on interpretation. What that means is locally, if you have any questions about interpretation of the standard and you want to understand whether you are interpreting it as what it should be, you can submit those queries to the technical committee, and the technical committee will look at this and will respond. And the response will be elevated to TC 207 SC1 for their acceptance. So that will become something like a national interpretation. I don't think so far we have received any queries of interpretation, but I do encourage, if you have any queries of interpretation, do submit it through the secretariat, and then we will respond accordingly. All right. Okay, I apologize, I have gone beyond time, but I want to get back to my questions to see whether I have clarified. So I have clarified on the changes. I have spoken about the certification transition, the date. Now the regulations, obviously 14,001 is a voluntary standard. It is not in the EQA, but as far as 14,000 is concerned, it does require you to make sure that you meet your compliance obligations. So the standard provides you a mechanism to help you meet the compliance obligations, should it be from a DOE or elsewhere. Yeah? So it's not a regulation, but it helps you to meet those. 14,001 auditing, obviously, you will need to update yourself on these requirements since there are new requirements. So this is not a training, yeah, because I did not talk to you about the hows and the implications. I've only been talking to you about the what. So if you are going to be an auditor, you need detailed understanding how these changes work together. So obviously you will have to update on your competence expectation. And if you're a certification auditor, you must meet the requirements of the accreditation body. So that's why you need to wait for the announcement. 14,001 and ESG and sustainability, like I mentioned earlier on, you have all your ESG expectations, which are normally geared towards the external communications and disclosure. So your EMS is there to address your significant environmental impact, address risks and opportunities related to this. And most of these ESG frameworks and disclosure requirements also expect you to disclose on your risks and opportunities. So your EMS, output of your EMS, the results of your EMS, because it is coming out of a management system that has been looked over, monitored, should be able to provide reliable information that you can use to communicate with your stakeholders. Yeah, doesn't matter which framework you're using, you know, GRI or ISSB or CDP and all of that. So the EMS allows you to generate that information in a reliable manner as well. And remember that EMS is supporting the environmental pillar, yeah, of sustainability. Okay. Oh, a lot of questions. Okay, so I have been receiving questions as well. I have asked my I have also some very specific questions that are, okay, so I have some specific questions that I haven't answered, yeah, that were submitted. Let me go through that first, all right? So a lot of questions I noticed that were submitted to me, and maybe they are here, are about climate change. Now, I've already explained to you the context clauses for 1.2 asks you to consider your environmental conditions, which include climate change. Yeah, so there's not only climate change, but there could be biodiversity, ecosystem health, resource, and all of that, and then climate change. Consider. In the amendment, yes, it only focused on climate change, but that amendment has been incorporated, and you can see the examples have expanded as well. So it is not safe for you to say that the 2026 edition is, for context, for 142, it's only focused on climate change, all right? You need to consider these other environmental conditions as well. But then there is a question here about, right, should you consider, when you were looking at your environmental conditions, and this is at your context understanding, should you realize that for you, maybe biodiversity, climate change is something, right? It is an issue that you need to look into, and you need to do something about. And remember, do something about means you need to consider it when you are setting up your system, when you're thinking about your aspects, impacts, when you're thinking about your compliance obligations, your risks and opportunities, operational control. So it cascades down, yeah? So the question is, how deeply or how strictly will auditors, the example given here is climate change, yeah? So the question is, do we now have to document our carbon footprinting? And there was another similar question that said, do we now have to look at physical and transition risks and opportunities coming from climate change and all of that? So obviously the question was on climate change, but remember, I want to repeat, there are other environmental conditions. But I think the gist of the question is that when I'm implementing this, yeah, how deep do I go? And when I'm auditing this, how deep do I go? The answer lies with you, because the standard says you decide risks and opportunities that you want to address. And then it says how you want to address, at what speed, what time scale, you decide. Operational control as well, you decide. But remember, the decision comes from some kind of an evaluation, all right? So whatever you had decided, that should be part of your EMS, and that shall be audited. Now, whether you want to look at, the other thing I want to explain is, the clause on risks and opportunities, there's a definition on risks and opportunities in ISO 14001. Yeah, it is adverse effects and beneficial effects. Adverse effects, risk, beneficial effects, opportunity. That's the definition of risks and opportunities. So if you are using ISO 14001, you need to be using the definitions in ISO 14001. You need to understand that. Now, in ISO 14001, nowhere does it say environmental risks. But remember, in your management system, you may be talking about environmental risks. It doesn't matter, yeah? Because the way you use this management system standard is, you already have practices in the organization. You're not expected to change your practices to meet that. The standard, you're bringing the standard into your current practices. So remember, I talked about the documented information maintained, or now it says documented information shall be available as evidence. But in your organization, you may want to call that records. It doesn't matter. But whatever it is, whatever that you're doing, you need to make sure that you're using those terms, those definitions as required by the standard. Yeah. So you need to understand, when the standard talks about risks and opportunities, there is a specific definition. So the answer to the question, how deep and all of that, it is whatever that you have decided to include in your EMS, within the scope of your EMS, that is what should be audited. Yeah. There's another question here about digital systems. Of course, obviously now, a lot of organizations are digitizing, yeah, your documentation and all of that. If that is the system that you have to manage your documented information, then that it is it. But again, it must be able to meet the requirement of the standard itself. Right. There is a question here about newly introduced GHG accounting and LCA requirement. There is no requirement on GHG accounting and LCA requirement in 14,001/2026, full stop. I spoke about that. All right, there are also a few questions here about aligning with ISO 9001 and 45,001. As I understand it, 9001 is also undergoing a revision. It is now at the FDIS. And I understand there are changes there as well, but I also understand that they are not huge changes. There are some changes, obviously. But remember, if you, and 45,001 as well is undergoing a revision. I believe it's at a DIS stage. Now, should you have in place an integrated management system, your integrated management system, and if you are conforming to these standards, must conform to these standards. But remember, yeah, like the example I gave just now, in 14,001, definition of risks and opportunities, there is a defined description of risks and opportunities. And then in 9001, risks and opportunities could be expressed differently. 45,001, risks and opportunities could be expressed differently. You need to make sure that you keep this distinct health and safety. Although the prescribed format is the same, but the requirements, they are intended for different purposes, and they will meet all the requirements of all the standards. I've spoken about that. I've spoken about that. Okay, there's one very specific question about ISO 14008. What's the relationship between 14,001/2026 and ISO 14008, monetary valuation of environmental impacts? So if you remember, I mentioned that the SC1 works on a lot of standards. One of the standards that SC1 worked on is also ISO 14008, monetary valuation of environmental impacts. But this is not a certifiable standard, it's a guidance standard. And there's also 14,007, which is determining costs and benefits of environmental impacts, which works together with 14,008. Basically, the relationship 14,001 helps you to identify your environmental impacts, especially your significant environmental impacts. And 14,008 then helps you to take that further to evaluate the environmental impacts from a monetary point of view. Monetary means the economic point of view, where you can quantify the environmental impact from economic valuation. All right, so it takes you further. But again, it's related to your environmental impact. So 14,001 helps you to identify those. So that's how it kind of like relates to each other. Yeah, I think I've answered all the questions here. So let me look at I've had help from the secretariat here. Thank you very much, Arif and everybody else. So what they have done is they have helped me to compile the questions in the chat. So I'm going to just look at them. Some of them are about the available for purchase. I think I've already explained. If you want to buy the ISO version, you can go to ISO and buy now. It's in Swiss francs. I think it's about ringgit Malaysia 900 something. But if you want to wait for the MS, you have to wait until the third quarter, which will be much cheaper. RM 50 ringgit kot. Yeah. Yeah. So 50 ringgit compared to 900 ringgit, no brainer lah. But again, please don't cetak rompak lah, yeah. Okay. So there are some questions here about very principle based about why bother with ISO when there is a setback from larger economies like the US. I'm not going to address that because it does not affect the changes that we have made. Maybe another conversation, maybe we can have a teh tarik and talk about that. Okay, there's a question about transitioning. Somebody has just been certified to 14,001 2015 very recently in February. Congratulations. So what now? Now that the 2026 version is up, like I said, the transition period effective date as far as MS 14,001 is concerned will be announced by DSM, so you'll probably wait. But normally, like I said, globally, you have a three-year period to transition. But you'll have to discuss it with your certification body on how to do that, you know, whether you want to do it at the next recertification or at the next surveillance and all of that. But then if you are certified to MS, if you're certified to MS ISO 14001, obviously you got to wait for the MS ISO 14001 to be published first and then work on transition then. Yeah, so I think I've explained that. A lot of questions about certification. I already explained about certification transition. I'm a construction site and we never had ISO 14001. May I know how my top management need ISO? Is it necessary for the construction company? Obviously, if you are a forward-looking organization and you understand all the pressures about environmental impacts, you want to be able to address your environmental impacts and stakeholders' expectation in a more systematic manner, ISO 14001 is the answer for you. Again, like I said, you may not want to explore third-party certification. You may want to implement the standard and then do certification at a time when it becomes absolutely necessary. Benefits for our company, especially for green project, we started ESG. So again, ESG, environment, social governance, the E is all about your environmental impacts, your environmental performance. So if you want to enhance your environmental performance, ISO 14001 will help you deal with that, yeah? So that's where 14,000 comes in. Can you further explain difference between planning of change and management of change in 45,001? I have not yet seen what 45,001 says about management of change because like I said, they are also undergoing a revision. But I think the intention of both is when there is a change, because a lot of times what has happened is in an organization, even those that I work with, they set up a management system, but when changes happen, and because change happened in one department, the rest of the company doesn't know. So the implication of the change on the management system is not fully recognized, appreciated, and addressed. So that happens, right? You all know you are in organizations. So this requirement on change, planning of change, management of change, is to ensure that when there is change, you make sure that you are looking at the change, looking at the implications on your management system, and then you're addressing the change in a way that it doesn't make you deviate from the intended outcome of your management system. I believe the intentions are the same, but maybe the specific requirements are a little bit different, the way you want to demonstrate it. Future ISO 14001 lead auditor training include the requirement maintained. Like I mentioned, 14001 2015 has been withdrawn. Now there is 14001 2026. So I would expect it will be 2026. For manufacturing sites, establishing legal requirements, what specific documentation process update should be? I'm sorry, I cannot give you this answer. This is very detailed. It's a whole training course. The documentation, you have to read the standard, yeah? In specific clauses, it calls for documented information. So you got to make sure that you have documented information for those requirements. In clauses where they don't call for documented information, it doesn't mean you don't need documented information. You got to look at clause 7, which says that you have the freedom to decide, yeah, what kind of documented information you want, how much, how deep, how broad. You make the decision, yeah, based on the complexity, turnover, and all of that. Yes, if you are already certified to 14,001 2015, obviously your 2015 management system is valid, yeah. It is valid. It's not yet. It only expires in the 3 years transition time. Practical application, I'm sorry, I cannot give you practical application. Limit soalan, okay. Oh, ini you bincang dengan saya eh? Oh, okay. Ada address saja. Mana technical? Okay. Do we need to apa ni? Do we need to revise our policy? Again, like I said, after this, you need to read the requirement of the standard and see what you need to update. Beneficial impact, obviously, beneficial impacts, things that are positive. Template, new template, there was never a template for aspect impact. Yeah, how to buy the MS? Yes, you go to the website of JSM, yeah, like how you bought last time lah, MS online kan? Yeah. Oh, sorry, my soul. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay. It is 5 minutes away from finishing, so I'm just very quickly looking at the soalan. Okay, tapi I rasa oleh kerana masa dah, we are coming to the end, so I won't be able to answer the questions anymore, but I think the questions are quite similar. So I hope you got a bit of an understanding of the 14,001 and 2026 edition. Any questions, obviously, about buying and all of that, you can ask Jabatan Standard Malaysia. Training and all of that, obviously, because the new standard has been published, I would assume training providers and all of that will start to take on board the 2026 version. But remember, keep in mind that transition period, you are still allowed 3 years before you fully transition. And I understand some certification bodies, they've already put a cutoff. I heard somewhere that some certification bodies, they have put a cutoff as October 2028. They are not going to do 2015 anymore, all 2026. So you need to have a discussion with your certification bodies for that question, yeah. Other than that, like I mentioned, if you have any questions about interpretation, you can submit to Department of Standards, to the Secretariat, and the questions will be submitted to the TC1 for us to look at. And it is, you cannot ask us questions like, what does this mean? No, bukan soalan macam tu. Tapi soalan dia is contohnya, planning of changes. You can say that, does planning of change mean that we have to do this? Yes. So you need to ask that kind of a question. You cannot ask, what does this mean? Yeah, structured question is your interpretation. So you are asking the TC whether your interpretation is aligned with the requirement of the standard, all right? So that is clarification on interpretation. You can submit those questions, that is no problem at all, and we shall work at it. Now, I have already explained to you about the standards. I hope that whatever information that you are getting from other sources, if you find that it is contradicting to what has been presented here, for example, you know, some other information provider is telling you that, oh, now you have to do this, but actually is contradicting with the requirements of the standard, please do question that as well, yeah? Because one of the main reasons why majority of the ISO member bodies decided that they want to amend the standard and not revise the standard was because to manage the economic cost. Yeah, if the standard was revised, if major new requirements were introduced, there would be a cost implication on organizations to transition. So a lot of the developing countries did not want major revisions, wanted amendment. So that's why it was important for me to show you that there are only limited new requirements. All right, so if you are told that there are all kinds of new requirements there, please take it with a pinch of salt. Please go back to the standard and verify that. You are not supposed to be burdened with additional economic costs, especially in the current times. Yeah, because 14,001 2015 was fit for purpose. It is a management system. You can't do much with the management system standard actually. Yeah, it is still fit for purpose, but now there have been some amendments to make it easier for you to apply and to make sure that it's aligned with the harmonized structure so that it is easier for you to integrate with other management system standards. Okay, so this is a picture of the core people in the working group that were involved in the standard. Yeah, this was taken in Toronto last year where we finalized the standard. So I am done. Thank you very much, Nurul. Do I hand it back to you? Okay. So Nurul, maybe you can just mention where this video is going to be.
Okey, baiklah. Setinggi-setinggi penghargaan kepada Puan Amal Jiko selaku pengerusi bagi Jawatan Kuasa Teknikal, Environmental Management System, Environmental Auditing and Related Environmental Investigation, Annex 26, TC1 atas pembentangan sisi overview berkenaan ISO 14001-2026 dan pengendalian sesi soal jawab dengan jawapan yang sangat jelas dan padat. Terima kasih juga diucapkan kepada tuan-puan di atas soalan-soalan yang diajukan semasa sesi soal jawab pada hari ini. Saya percaya tuan-puan dapat pemahaman yang lebih baik serta bagaimana dokumen ini boleh dilaksanakan secara praktikal di dalam organisasi tuan-puan. Baiklah, majlis kita telah sampai ke penghujungnya. Sebelum itu, suka untuk saya ingatkan agar tuan-puan untuk subscribe kepada saluran YouTube rasmi Jabatan Standard Malaysia bagi mengikuti video-video yang disediakan dari semasa ke semasa dan juga dimaklumkan bahawa sesi webinar ini akan di-upload semula di dalam saluran YouTube rasmi Jabatan Standard Malaysia. Jadi pihak penganjur ingin memaklumkan bahawa bagi sesi ini tiada sijil penyataan disediakan buat para peserta. Walau bagaimanapun kami berharap perkongsian ilmu bagi mengenai ISO 14001-2026 ini memberi manfaat kepada hadirin yang telah hadir. Saya mewakili pihak Jabatan Standard Malaysia mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada semua hadirin yang hadir dan memohon maaf sekiranya terdapat sebarang kekurangan dan kekhilafan sepanjang kami mengendalikan sesi webinar ini. Sekian, terima kasih dan semoga kita bertemu lagi di program yang akan datang.